All right. So second half of the game, obviously we get to see the massive youth movement. We get to see what I thought covering it's kind of my first class that I ever really covered. And the guys that, I got to know a lot of these guys throughout their process before they committed, after they committed. So super cool for me to see them come out and perform like this. But in addition to that, I just think it's by far and away the best class Ohio State has had since 2021. And looking at these dudes come out and just look ready. I mean, there's so many of them that flashed. What were your thoughts? Who stood out to you? What'd you love? I mean, obviously there's a couple that stood out.
Yeah. Just going back to, first of all, to your comment about being the best class since 2021, I wanted to ask Brian just after, what he's seen from these guys. And certainly for as many as got to play on Saturday, if he's kind of just not taken aback, I know he's not taken aback, but if it's just, would it just truly in all, or, just a joy to watch, how many hits he has, or he knows he has in that class already, whether they are big contributors this year or not, most of them probably not, but the fact that they could be, that he already knows these guys are very close to being ready-made contributors now, that had to be quite the sight to behold for him, and quite the realization, if he didn't already know that for sure, before the game, just watching it in action for the first time and just knowing some of these guys. So with that being said, I've never made it any secret that Riley Pettijohn was my favorite member of that entire class. I'm not the only one, so I'm not saying, but I've been, as big on Riley Pettijohn as anybody that covers, Ohio State football or recruiting. And to watch him out on the field on Saturday, again, against very, very inferior competition, I totally get that as well. But if you're going to go out there and play that competition, you better look like a man amongst boys. And oh, buddy, was he a man amongst boys. So that obviously was the one that stood out the most. And then Bo being the other one. I think those two guys probably stole the show all day, for as little, I don't say as little, but for the kind of suppressed amount of time that the starters got to play. I think Bo and Riley came out of that as the biggest talking points for anybody, who was excited about what Ohio State's going to look like in the future, maybe even, later this year, depending on injuries or how they're able to fit them in. But I mean, you have a future running back stud and you have a future, star linebacker that right now, and they might be ready to do that now. They're just not going to have the opportunity to do that yet, potentially. So those two were the obvious ones as well. But I thought TJ Alford looked fantastic.
TJ looked great coming off the edge.
And, again, I was really big on Riley, but also very high on just that duo that they got in that class, in terms of future of the position. So he looked fantastic as well.
Fahim Delane was laying the wood.
Fahim was out there as well. So those are some of the names that were the obvious ones. I'm trying to think what else. The second half was a little bit of a blur. Trying to the good thing about the game was I was able to start writing early in the third quarter and get that done. So which takes some of my focus away, but still watched plenty of it as well. And then getting down to the field, trying to think, anything else that stood out. Those are probably the three obvious ones.
Tavian almost got Phillip Bell's head taken off. I don't know if you caught that play.
I might have been on my way down to the field because I just caught the last end of Tavian being out there.
You'll see it when you check the all 22.
Yeah, I'm going to watch it tomorrow.
Wow. It was bad, bro.
Yeah, that's
kudos to Phillip Bell for going for the ball because it was a sure thing. Like, I'm getting my head taken off and I'm still going to try to catch this.
I'm interested to see this now. I mean, that's something that even, the most experienced quarterbacks can do it from time to time.
Yeah.
And you learn, as a young quarterback as well. Yeah. Oh, obviously, I forgot one. Zion Grady.
Yeah.
It was another one that, obviously flashed or popped, as Ryan Day would say. That seems like a very obvious. And we talked about him, in the preseason about the possibility of him getting into the rotation as a true freshman, already in the series rotation, depending on how that shakes out. Logan George, we got an answer on him today, but
we got an answer on Logan today.
Without him being available, so far and not being sure what you're going to get out of, CJ Hicks or Bo Atkinson like that. We thought maybe Zion could find his way into the rotation already. And whether that happens or not remains to be seen, but he's certainly flashed that he's not far away from being a difference maker for that defense.
He's not far. I really don't think he is I don't know. We'll see a couple more games how these guys play. But I mean, when you just look at when you just look at him move and the size and the strength, he's a dude now. He's a dude. But when we talk about this class of 2026, that a lot of people are, rightfully irritated with the fact that it's not the standard class, it is important to point out that this is almost like a class and a half in 2025. And it kind of offsets, the few dudes that if you had 2 more dudes in 26, it would be a really good class. You got a couple extra in 25 is the point. Like hit all down the board.
Yeah,
it's crazy. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, with the 26 class, whatever it ultimately proves to be, the success rate with what you're hitting right now, or it looks like you're about to hit in the 2025 class, certainly helps that out a lot as well. So that's a great point.
For sure. And they're great at that. Now, this is where I get into arguments sometimes, Dylan, as a recruit, Nick, and I acknowledge that this is my blanket, right? This is where I go back to. This is how I revert to. This is the prism through which I see the game and building and roster construction. The transfer portal does not give you the opportunity to get to know guys, to establish a relationship. And we've been very fortunate at Ohio State in this transfer portal era with hit. Yeah. Right now, when we look at the transfers on this team, Logan George, Ethan Anyanwa, Bo Atkinson, Max Clare, who Ryan Day told us had a rough time adapting to the speed and the physicality when he came. I'm not writing any of these guys off. I still think Claire will be really good, but I think the point is, no, it's not a guaranteed thing that these dudes are just going to come in and elevate their game when they're coming from Idaho State or Rice or Purdue or North Carolina. It's not.
We talked about this leading into the Texas game about that Texas defensive line and everybody talking about it being, so stout. And, we kind of said, or at least I said, is it though? You're putting a lot of stock in the fact that they're just going to get a bunch of hits out of the transfer portal. It looks good on paper. They addressed a need, but are these guys really ready to play at the level that Texas needs them to go potentially win a national title? It's hardly a guarantee. And you're right. I'm not writing anybody off as well. But for a guy like Max Clare, who's very obviously a very good football player and is going to be a very good football player at Ohio State, Ryan Day talked about today the fact that, there was an adjustment period in camp, a physicality adjustment, just being used to the physicality with which it's required to practice at Ohio State, let alone go out there and play, for that team. And that was an adjustment. And that's for a guy who's already established himself as, he's on draft boards as, one of the, top 2-3 tight ends in the class. So, I mean, that's a guy who's obviously very already, prepared to go play at the next level. And he had to make an adjustment as well. That's not even saying anything of these other guys who those adjustments were even bigger from where they were coming from. At least Max had played Big Ten football before, it's not a guarantee. Look, Ohio State's been really good at, plugging and playing, with some of these transfer guys. But it doesn't mean that it's, it's just, it's tough. I mean, to rely on that, the transfer portal, and balance that with, what you're doing in your recruiting classes and where you can get guys that you can plug and play and address a need that, that maybe has popped up in the program. Obviously that's a fine line coaches have to walk every season, but it's certainly a tricky situation if you're going to bank on filling a position of need with that transfer portal. At least with recruits, if you don't get it right away, there's still hope, with development and the way they grow, that it can ultimately pan out. If you don't get it right with the transfer portal, you just wasted, not only a scholarship, you wasted, potentially, a position because, if you felt you needed to go out and get somebody to plug in and play there as a transfer already, then it means you didn't feel good about what you had in the room either. And if you missed on that transfer, what's behind them? Probably not ready to help you this year either. So, it's a tricky situation.
Yeah, I don't think anybody does a better job at it than Ohio State right now. Is looking back at the past 3 years, but. It's just not ideal to ever need something and go into the transfer portal. You want to be able to, their basic philosophy is we want to be able to upgrade where we can, where it makes sense in talent and fill some potential needs on the roster here or there. You're not going to want to go in and seek 2 offensive starting tackles. That's not the plan. If that's where you're at, there has been, problems, the last couple of cycles. That's the deal.
Wait, anyway, have there been problems with the offensive line recruiting at Ohio State?
What are you saying?